Meeting to order. Good evening. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Architectural Board of Review for May, what is today, the 7th? 7th, 2019. Roll call, please, Michael.
Member Callahan?
Here.
Member Dahlman?
Here.
Member Russ?
Here.
Member Waymire?
Here.
And Chair Hunter?
Here.
And members Deegan and Kerouac are absent.
Okay, is there anybody in the audience that has anything to talk about that's not on the agenda tonight? Okay, good. Then we'll move on. We have two public hearings. Since they are public hearings, anybody that's going to speak to either one of these projects needs to stand, raise your right hand, and repeat after me. If I can remember what this goes. I solemnly swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth on the testimony I'm about to give. Okay, thank you.
Well, you did good. Sorry about the cheat sheet.
Pretty good?
Yeah.
Okay, first up, we have the Scout Project. Public hearing to review site plan to add planter boxes at Community Church at 117 East Scranton. Who's going to speak to that? I guess the Scout. Okay, if you want to go up there, give, yeah, okay,
okay,
that's
sure.
even better.
That's great. I'll open the computer. That's okay.
Whoops, wrong project.
Right. See that? And, let's see. There we go. And I have a remote too. Well, I don't see the remote, but you can just use the down arrow to advance manually.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Michael, you want to adjust that mic down for?
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's perfect.
So before you start, just tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Dylan Burns. I live here in Lake Bluff. I live at 530 East North Avenue here.
Okay.
So I'm a life scout here at Troop 42 in Lake Bluff. What I'm trying to build, well, the reason why I'm doing this project is for my EO rank, I'm required to have a service project, and I thought that an urban garden for the community church would fit the requirements. So what we were gonna build for this project was we were planning on building 2 gardens. One was gonna be a 3-box kind of vertical-based garden, and the other garden was gonna be a ground-based garden. We were planning on doing the project on June 1st. So some of the benefits of my project is that it's going to be supporting food insecure families because we're going to be donating all the harvest to Beacon Place, which supports like families that don't have as much food in Waukegan, like in Chicago. It's also going to have green space to absorb water, which would be like the soil. And it also improves the view of the church parking lot because it covers a brick wall, and during like garden season, there's gonna be plants there which will make the view a little bit better from the sidewalk. And so the first garden is a 3 kind of like box garden. So the length of each shelf is gonna be about 6 feet, and the depth of each box back is gonna be 1 foot. And there's gonna be about like 3 risers in the middle to support the gardens. And what we're planning on planting in the boxes are lettuce, herbs, and other low height plants because the height like between each shelf is kind of small, so we have to stick with low height plants so they don't hit the top shelves. And the other garden that we're planning to build is a ground level garden. So the depth of the garden is actually 21 inches, which is greater than the other garden, and the height of the garden is going to be 1 foot. So what we're planning to plant in this garden is going to be tomatoes because the width is actually greater than the other garden, which means that we thought it'd be better to plant bigger plants because they need more soil, and we thought this would fit this garden better. So here's a top view of where we're planning to build the garden. So on the right you can see is where the community church is, and there is a wood deck behind where we're planning to do the garden, and then there's brick parking to the left, and this kind of striped area is where we're planning on doing the garden. And then here's like kind of a view on Google Maps. The red area highlights where we're going to be doing the garden, and the green highlight represents some of the bushes that are going to be right behind the garden. And then there's kind of like the library on the right and the community church obviously on the upper left. So some of the construction details. So the vertical garden is kind of divided into 2 parts for more stability and a shorter span. And we're going to be using cedar wood, but like weather resistant and chemical free because we didn't want the chemicals mixing with the soil. And we're going to be using screws to fasten the wood and for it to maintain joint strength. And to keep the whole garden kind of fastened into the ground, we're going to be using long stakes. And we're planning on not going below the frost line just to keep the garden stable and so it doesn't fall over. And so for the supervision for this project, there will be adult leaders attending from my troop that will be supervising and using the power tools. And to help me on the project will be scouts from my troop that will be volunteering. So here's a view from the sidewalk. That's where we're planning on doing it. There's going to be 2 gardens one garden on each side of the gate in the middle, if you can see that. And then here's just a few more pictures. So here's a front view, and then view from the other side. So that was my presentation. I'm open to feedback or suggestions.
Thank you, Dylan. I wish everybody made as good a presentation as you just did.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Tim? Starting with you.
No, that was a really great presentation, very thorough.
Thank you.
Just make sure that it is stable though, and so it doesn't,
Yes.
so it won't fall over. Other than that, I think it's great.
Yeah, I agree with Tim. I think the only concern I have is that, as we see in the news every once in a while with dressers, that a child could pull open the drawers and climb up on it and cause it to fall over on them, that the 2-foot stakes that you're gonna put in the ground to secure it and make sure it can't fall over are really important.
Yes.
So I'm glad that you've got that way to stabilize it and keep it there. Other than that, I think it's an excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Carol?
Same comments, I think, for Mr. Burns. Thank you for the presentation and preparing drawings in advance. It always helps us to be better prepared. And actually, I do have the same concern. I don't know who gets to water this, but wet soil weighs a lot. It seems like you can't stake into the brick driveway, so are you just staking one way, and is this a temporary structure just for the season?
It will be lasting for multiple years, but what we're planning to building on is actually dirt, so it will be fastened to the dirt, not brick. The brick parking kind of is in front of it.
It does kind of seem like a post down to the frost level would be called for that amount of weight, so I am anxious, but I guess we're all saying the same thing, so. Great presentation, thank you, and thank you for the effort to improve the view downtown. I am a big fan of the community church garden, and to grow food is just an awesome idea.
Julie?
Great presentation. I also appreciate the drawings. Was concerned about the weight of it falling over. Was also curious if it was a permanent structure or if it was going to be just seasonal, but it sounds like it's going to be out there throughout the whole entire year.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think everybody is a little concerned about a 2-foot stake holding it up, and I think one of the things you need to think about is what that stake is made out of and how far down it has to go. Because the ability for some little kid to climb up this thing is not unreal, and then, like everybody says, it's potentially going to tip over. But other than that, I think it's a great idea what you're taking on. And the way you're describing why you're doing it is something that we should all be doing in a much bigger venue. So kudos to you for doing that. Anything else? Do we have a motion then? Do we need a motion?
Yeah, we do, yeah.
Okay. Somebody make a motion.
Motion to make a recommendation to the village board.
I'll make a motion that the plan be approved as submitted.
I second.
Okay, Mike, I'll call.
Okay. Member Callahan?
Aye.
Member Dahlman?
Aye.
Member Russ?
Aye.
Member Waymire?
Aye.
And Chair Hunter.
Aye. I'd like to just make a suggestion, if it doesn't impose too much, that when you decide how you're going to structure this thing into the ground, that maybe you can check with Mike to make sure that it's really going to stand up the way you hope it does.
All right, we'll do.
Just- Okay?
Okay, yep, sounds good. I'll help you with that.
Otherwise, good for you. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Oh, we didn't do minutes.
Huh?
Minutes.
Oh, we didn't do minutes. You're
We
right,
do
I'm
that now.
sorry. I'm so excited to do this. It was,
I agree.
okay. Let's do the minutes. Any comments on the minutes, one way or the other?
Nope.
They were pretty complete, I don't know.
It's very complete on a circular discussion. I did notice you were quoted as using the word bogus twice, though.
I noticed that too.
Do you think we should look at the similar dissimilar ordinance?
Yes,
Okay, then.
that's pretty much all that this thing started with, 40-some years ago. And it made very little sense.
Well, if bogus is the word that describes your opinion of it, I guess we should.
So, not tonight, however. Any comments? Corrections?
No?
Punctuation? Changes?
Move to approve as Mike wrote them?
Okay. Anybody second the move on that?
Sure, second.
All right, then that's a voice vote. Let's just, everybody in favor of the minutes of whenever it was, April 2nd, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next is the public hearing to review a site plan to expand the parking lot at 101 Waukegan Road. And who's going to speak to that?
Hi, I'm Cliff Pluntzner. I work with J. Emil Anderson. We own the building at 101 Waukegan. We're looking to expand the parking lot on the west side of the building. We have tenants in the building that are expanding. They need more parking for their employees. And we put together a pretty good plan, we believe, landscape and civil, to accomplish that.
Okay. Tim, what do you think?
I don't know about the, like, how close they're now allowed to get, what, 50 feet with the parking lot, right? Is it-
Right, yeah, so the setback requirements were changed. They used to be 100 feet, now it's reduced to 50
Okay.
feet, so.
I know there were some comments by Jody Mariano.
Right.
She looked at it, about the genus and species of trees and other plants, that they were really not native, most of them. And I found that going off that list of plants on the, what is it, the Village of Lake Bluff Landscape Playbook, that was just recently adopted.
Mhm.
It looked like there were a lot of plants that were maybe not native, but also it looked like most of those were up against the building, which I kind of think that it doesn't really need to be native up there. I mean, it looked like the landscape plan itself was pretty well thought out. I would like to see a little bit more planting going on between Waukegan and the bioswale, as far as like trees and shrubs. It looks like most of them were either existing or they were gonna be transplanted, some of the trees.
I can address questions as they come up.
Okay.
I'll just keep mine closed.
John Carlson from Carlson Landscape Associates. We're from Libertyville. You know, I guess, thank you for your comment on the native plant.
Yeah.
I think that I did get that letter this afternoon, and a few comments would be that, you know, at the core of this area is roughly 18,000 square feet of pure native bioswale seating.
Right.
And part of the landscape challenge is to adapt that to an existing building that's already landscaped on 3 sides, that has no other native community within hundreds of yards. So my approach was, I looked at the plant colonies that are there now along the building, which honestly, I'm gonna say goes back to the 80s. There's a lot of alder trees, hawthorns, overgrown mugo pines. We went, and I can bring up that sheet if it would help, but you know, on the plant removal, we were saving some of the quality healthy trees, young amelanchier, some recently planted blue muffin viburnum that look like they've been there for maybe 2 or 3 years. Kentucky coffee tree that were from a recent phase. But any of the alder, the poor condition hawthorns up against the building, it was better to address it as the building facade as a clean slate.
Yeah.
Out by Waukegan Road, there's quite a few mature hackberry, one oak, a few random Norway maple. But there's a linden tree 6 feet from the curb that looks like it might have been driven over 15 years ago and turned into a large shrub of a tree right next to the road. So it was just, let's get a clean slate and see how we can put it back together. So to drive by the building now, kind of, the building structure isn't changing, but we're taking what's been presented for decades as the backside of a building, and we're trying to treat it like this is the front face, this is the presentation face of the building. So in doing that, we really have to respect that it's got low windows, there's a turret style to the corner columns. When you drive by now, what is basin is very close to the building. So what happens is the basin moves westerly, the parking comes out to the 50-foot setback, and that bioswale basin ends up being from high water line to high water line, it's about 30 to 33 feet wide. So we kind of inherit this long linear habit. So as far as the native categories, things like I've got Nyssa sylvatica in there. Well, it's not native to Lake County, and the list that I referenced today was, hey, this is the plant colony for Lake County, if not Lake Bluff proper. So I'm not really far off on native on a you know, even the tulip trees,
Yeah.
native to central Illinois, Kentucky coffee tree. And I went through and I quickly downloaded today, okay, of my list, Morton Botanic Gardens, you know, right off the bat, 4 of them were listed as native to the Chicagoland area. It might not be on that list, but we're close. And I'm not saying that I can't change a tree variety. I could, I just saw the letter today. But on the seed mix and even the perennial types, the seed mix contains a type of a monarda, which is bee balm. Well, at the foreground where you see the deep colored flowers, that's Amsonia, that's monarda, there is Baptisia in there. The Amsonia is not in the seed mix, but all the others are actually part of the seed mix. That's just a nosing plant at the north end growing in the bioswale basin is it's vegetated right away, but it's really a multi-year process of all the plants and forbs evolving. It's 3 dozen minimum types of native grasses and forbs, which would be flowering plants, that over time they all survival of the fittest. I mean, let's say they're all going to live, but maybe down in the low areas you're going to end up with a little bit more grass, things that are tolerant of the erosion protection, more color up high. The mix, well, 60% of the seeds are plants 3 feet or lower. There's also things in there that get 5, 6, 7 feet tall. But we intentionally picked mixes that wouldn't overwhelm it. From Waukegan Road, the basin falls off, and maybe from Waukegan Road, the bottom of the basin is down 5 feet. But from the parking lot area and most of the other part of the landscape, let's just round it off to 4 feet wide. So we're expecting that you're not going to, over time, just look across that basin. I saw that as, no, that ends up being kind of the core feature of this front yard landscape. So as I brought that up the upslope towards the parking and towards the building, what my goal was is I've got to present this, transition it to a more kept landscape. That's one reason where along the nosing of all the cars that park facing west, that's it's kind of a proprietary name, but a no-mow type grass seed. It's intended to be mowed once or twice a year, gets about 6 inches tall, but it's a transition plant. We need the overhang space for the cars. We need some room for snow load to be pushed over that way. So we weren't trying to just isolate the bioswale basin captive in that one area. I look at the bioswale basin going from where it turns to lawn near Waukegan Road all the way up to the back of the curb. The plants that are on that ridge, and I did bring a print, and I can pass it out, where it's my sheet LS2 landscape plan with the grading contours exposed. So off the curb, there's roughly 5 feet of no-mow grass, but at that point, it's falling down on a 4-to-1 slope. So my goal is I really have to kind of keep these things out of the bottom. The reason I didn't make it super dense is because I see that basin as being an attractive feature. And I wasn't trying to create this additional linear wall of separating the basin vegetation from what we're trying to already jump to the other side of the Nyssa sylvatica and the winterberry and other shrubs I had on the upslope. Some of those plants are like a breath away from what's on their list. I've got a short type of Elliman's dwarf red twig dogwood, where on their list they've got some that are a little bit more full-size plants with stolonifera. So I don't see that as being way void of a native landscape. I really was trying to see what we're doing in the basin, complementary plants, but by the time I get up to the building, I needed to, I can't do native seeding up by the building. So I created a structure with boxwood following the contours of the building corners. I don't want to call it formal, but it's basically, that reflects the architecture of the building. There's strategic locations where I've got the tulip tree, where we actually have room to have a full-size tree that can scale the building. It can get taller than the building. It's clear of everything. You know, they're long enough trunk. Well, tulip tree, native to central southern Illinois and south of that, the cultivar I picked, it's a little bit smaller form. It's not going to get 100 feet tall, and it's long enough trunk, and it's more vertical than wide. It's not quite as big of a tree. The same thing with the Nyssa sylvatica. That's a black gum, beautiful fall color. Once people see it, they realize, well, that's a very pretty tree. Clean, glossy leaves, very few problems, bright red fall color, tolerates the wetness and cycles. Maybe my Cornelian cherry dogwood didn't fit their mix, but I can't see putting pagoda dogwood and torturing it between the window glass and the hot pavement, which was another dogwood variety that was on their list. It really had to do with,
I think a lot of those plants are actually, that you put in here. Like, I think they're fine,
okay,
really. I mean, the plants that they're saying are native, everything out in front is great. Everything close to the building, they're good plants. They're just not, they work well here in this climate. They're good plants.
Right.
They just don't, they're not
well,
native. But
like, as I went through their list, I've got 3 Triumph elm. One's in a parking lot island, and then 2. There is some symmetry. There's a pattern to that, the way it's set up, but
Yeah.
it's subliminal. It doesn't jump out at you. But their list included Princeton elm, okay, same species,
Yeah.
Ulmus. Well, Princeton elm isn't native to Illinois. American elm is. Princeton elm comes from the East Coast, and it happened to be one that survived Dutch elm disease in 1922. So they took cuttings, probably tissue culture, sold it all over. Well, there's other improved elms now in the same family that would be hybridized, that one would be better suited to be in a parking lot island or near the pavement. I couldn't see putting an American elm, straight species, in a parking lot island. So I think that even in their list, that they've taken a little bit of latitude. There's a cultivar of a paper birch. That's not a native tree. It's a cultivar of a native species. In some ways, you could look at my perennials as being the same thing. They're improved. I can't go fully native with them, but I think that we've transitioned from the 18,000 square feet of native seeding up into the landscape in a pretty well blended plant choice way without, and by the time I get to the ends of the building, I have to be in parity with what's going on the other 3 sides of the building. I can pass out the sheet with contours. For the most part, the bottom of the basin is flat area is what, 8 to 12 feet wide, Cliff? 8 to 12 feet. So for the most part, the basin, there's more in transition than there is flat bottom. That's a little bit why we blended the seed mixes for bottom and upslope. The engineering evolved, and at the end, we were able to calculate via Cliff that it will drain fast to a grade below soil level in there. And then I think it's 680.75 or 679. So what that means is that shortly after a rainstorm, all the water's gone. The bottom is at a 1% slope. So it's going to stay damp, wet. You've got other groundwater moving across it all the time. But the upslopes, without those big rain events, are probably going to have to transition to more of a mesic prairie, drier area. I was thrilled that it wasn't a wet bottom basin, because that's, to me, very challenging to keep it from turning into cattails or something else when you got those really shallow water tables. So I'm pretty confident that it's going to look like that picture. Maybe not quite as the vibrant color, but that's the character. If you do review the Waukegan corridor study, they included a picture of a bioswale with buffer coming down from parking, and for the most part, they had the trees and the plants on the upslopes, just bioswale on the bottom. They had a beautiful photograph, but it's not in Lake Bluff. It's a 240-foot wide swath of bioswale. So when I was happy, I had called staff when I was first asked to participate to make sure I was up to date on codes, ordinances, requirements for, if some might be for parking, for continuous parking, you have to screen 65% of it opaque to 4 feet, or you are required this many trees per spots. It was explained to me that it's a little bit looser than that. It has to be in parity. But in the end, even though we don't have the parking lot islands, our actual tree density around the parking lot is actually at a very high ratio. I'm gonna say it might be 5 to 1. There's quite a bit if you count the cornelian cherry and the ornamental trees that we have. So, I was trying to, the suggestion from Mr. Cole was read the thematic landscape identity and gateway and corridor plan, read that, and read the Waukegan corridor study. And anything that you can glean from that and incorporate into the project would be positive. And just know I was thrilled when I saw 101 Waukegan Road with parking and drive lane circling the west side and a bioswale running the full length, because that's exactly what we needed to put the parking lot in.
Neil?
I guess I was wondering, Mike, have they received a copy of this letter?
Just today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
They
I just
have-
emailed
they
it
do
to him
have it,
today.
though, okay. Because I'm not a landscape architect, so I don't understand these things like Tim does.
well,
I think the only comment that I had that made sense, as far as the adding the parking and moving the smoking rooms and such, I didn't have any problem with that. The only comment on here that was a question that hit my mind was the addition of more parking lot islands. And other than that, that's all I've got.
Yes, I'd say I have some similar comments. I was very happy to see the variety of species that you
Thank you.
put in the swale, whether it's going to be wet or not. And it sounds like you're on top of that. I'm sure Tim could talk to us a long time about cultivars and, what varieties there's, could you, and I'm certainly not an expert on that, and it's certainly true that where my boxwood doesn't do well 20 feet away from the building, yours nestled into that corner just might,
Yeah.
it makes a big difference, and it's a fine line. I did look up your big new trees, the coffee tree and the gum tree, I think, and Wilhelm and Swink say they're natives to the Midwest, so.
yeah, coffee tree is a great tree, and it's,
Yeah, there's 3
Great
fairly
street tree.
new ones on the north side where the parking gets rearranged. So one can stay where it's at, the other 2 get moved, staged, and then we actually replant 2 and add 2. It was just the best way to finish off that corner, because it's, it's kind of the character of the landscape coming down Carriageway Road.
Yeah, so that sounds good as far as it goes. It's great that you looked at those 2 corridor studies, and we do hear sometimes say that we can live with things a little more gritty than the suburban tidiness that seems endemic and continuous and ubiquitous, or whatever all the usual adjectives are. We can have something a little bit different here, but, there actually is a 3rd document, and that's about what the parking in the light industrial district has to be. And while I'm not going to argue for 100% screening of a parking lot, I think a little bit of variety in what's opaque and what is not is helpful. This is very opaque, very not opaque. I said the exact wrong word. In the winter, we have exactly no screening, and I know there aren't a lot of native evergreens for you to choose from, but I don't think we're seeing much of an approach to screening the parking lot yet in this plan, so I'm challenged by that.
Correct, I have no evergreens west of the parking lot curb. And I, on my transplant list, I'm saving 6 fairly new spruce that are 8 to 12 feet tall.
Right, but I couldn't figure out where they're going.
I didn't put them on the plan.
Oh.
Because as, they were in reserve. And honestly, there is room on the south lot line. There's a big grass buffer between properties. But I looked at it as, there was only one area that I thought they could work, but as the detention basin evolved, I thought that, that this basin came to the north, and we kind of draw the lawn down into it, and you're flanked by the big hackberries and the oak. you know, we've kind of established a theme different from spruce trees by the time we've done that. So that's why they don't show up. But if we were to plant on the slope, I just thought that I've got to, you know, that high water line is like, I can't ignore that. Because, you know, at some point, you know, we can be, you know, liquid water 5 feet from back of curb. And even if it's not there a long time, overall plant health, you know, that's where we had the beautyberry. I had southern bush honeysuckle, and I would concede that if I could find some, I'll change it to the northern bush honeysuckle that are on their plant list. But in the trade, I haven't come across that. If it's available, it looks nearly identical, I would switch it. But I think that the distance, it's, you know, we're 50 feet beyond the right-of-way line. So there's a pretty good throw to the car parking, correct? Right, so, you know, those cars, I believe, will be perceived much farther away than what's at the grocery store just north of there. It's a pretty long distance across that basin to the cars, any westerly view.
Do we know that dimension, Mike, offhand? At the grocery store we're being compared to, the Heinen's parking lot?
I don't know it exactly, but it is closer than 50, I think, there.
Okay, you know, our boilerplate document is the zoning, and, you know, there's only, well, maybe I didn't copy everything, but, you know, Architectural Board of Review determinations, you know, 9A, where, you know, to look at the required type and placement of screening, so we are looking for screening, regardless of the latitudes that we can choose. I mean, we are empowered to make substitutions. We are empowered to review this plan. And point 9B is that the intent of this article is to maintain an aesthetically pleasing park-like atmosphere. So, you know, again, that really does go to the lot screening. And, you know, you have a big dilemma here. You got a double-loaded aisle, and then it drops away. So how you would modify that easily, I don't know, but it's not being done.
Well,
it's really not being done.
I could add to the density of those shrubs to drop them down slope. I'm hesitant to connect it. I just see that there's a pretty view through there, and it's not just showing the building from Waukegan. It's the people looking out all the windows. I see that bioswale basin as looking very nice. And I've got low-profile plants out the windows, an occasional cornice moss or taller, you know, waist-high shrub that gives a little bit of buffer from the cars that are close, but I'm trying to still let you know, give them a distant view. You've got 60-year-old trees out in the Parkway of Waukegan, and I'm just trying not to condense it. So I'm fine if we dense it up down the slope. I'd still like to leave a little bit of filtered view through there, and part of the reason is I brought our bioswale seating up kind of to that seam of plants and then kind of carried through with the no-mow seating. If I make it too solid, I'm better off just using regular sod at the top. And what I'm trying to do is make the bioswale character run all the way up to the curb. So,
But
you know,
you're not anywhere near at risk of having it too solid. It's not anything like too solid. Nice choice of words, though,
okay,
but it's
all
not
right.
anything
So,
like too solid.
you know,
But it will
we
stand
make
up
it-
in the winter too. I mean,
Yeah.
the herbaceous stuff in the swale.
yeah.
Yeah.
How high will that be as you're, you know, compared to the
Well,
parking lot?
I think from the north that you'll have a really nice view, very appropriate to this, because you're gonna, the grades from where the monument sign is will kind of slowly roll down and fall into it. From Waukegan Road, it kind of is, well, from Waukegan curb, it's slowly falling away, and then it kind of gets to the point where it dives off. And that's where I thought that seeing the upslope, you'll read the upslope from Waukegan Road, like you do now, even though it's in a different position. But the bioswale plant mix at 60% 3 feet or less, which means 40% is 3 feet or taller. But if you kind of go through the fine print on the two piezo seed mixes, we've got some 5 to 7 foot plants in the mix. And what I was trying to describe with survival of the fittest is that as the conditions are right, the dominant plant is the one that's gonna kind of colonize that area. So I'm not saying that you're gonna have 7-foot plants everywhere, but I'm gonna say that there's gonna be a few pockets where things get up a little taller because its conditions are great and they do better that way. I don't have, any issue if you say, hey, add a little bit, but if we can parameter it to where I can know how much, how much denser, or if there is a minimum height continuous, I can draw down the slope. I don't want to go up any closer to the cars because that's really going to be where a good amount of the snow is going to have to be furrowed off for snow plowing. So I've got that 5-foot zone and then interrupted shrubs. I would just need a guideline or an agreement to where we'll make that adjustment in plant count or density and update the plan.
Okay, well, we'll have to talk about that a little bit, I guess, because the guideline is to screen it, and this is really contrary to your very persuasive argument.
Yeah, Tim, you had mentioned shrubs on the other side. And like on the upslope by Waukegan.
Yeah.
And right now, the beds that we're taking out there they're very
Not-
rough.
Actually, not really shrubs, but more trees, I would say.
Okay.
And maybe trees that hold on to their leaves a little bit longer, like some oaks or something.
Okay.
I don't know. Like northern pin oak or red oaks. I don't know if you have any on there right now.
Yes, are we thinking like 6 or 8 plants? Or more?
Oh,
I mean, just so I have,
yeah. Just some, like where some of these gaps are.
okay.
I
No,
think, and, like,
that seems reasonable. There was
and
one
move
of
them kind of so they're not so much in a line, but stagger them a
Okay,
little bit.
yeah. There was one other thing in the back of my mind reading the Waukegan Road document was the community bike trail. I mean, there's one sketched in for there, and I guess I didn't know if it was in right-of-way property or would it end up in right-of-way property? Because we have 10 feet to play with.
Oh, really?
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
it would probably be on the right of way.
It would be on the right-of-way?
Yeah.
Okay, because that was partly if it ends up being off right-of-way, then I've got 10 feet of level land,
Okay.
and that was it. But if it can go on right-of-way property, then it's really 10 feet to play with.
Okay.
Instead of, without planting in the right-of-way.
Right.
Which I would think I'm not supposed to do.
Well, I think it's great that Member Callahan is taking expansive macro look at it, which is great, but our code also says, the plantings to screen the lot are to be on your property.
Oh, okay.
It's
Well,
not,
then I've got
it's not
ten-
out
I've
at the
got-
Waukegan curb, it's at your parking
I've
lot.
got, it's not exactly 10 feet everywhere, right? It's in transition. Because in some parts, our parking lot's 54 feet away. Correct? Yeah, so there's,
Yeah.
so.
And this is also related to the absence of islands or peninsulas or whatever we want to call them, because, in this linear piece, we're not going to put an island in the middle of it unless you want to put a roundabout in the middle of your parking lot. That's not going to happen, but the absence of anything except one tree in that entire length.
Well, I do have 6 others, 8, 9 beyond flanking it. They're not into the parking, they're alongside. They're alongside. So
Yeah,
there is a,
the point being, if those islands or peninsulas or whatever you want to call them that interrupt that relentless length of the parking lot, if those existed, then you would have another palette for your species, because right now I'm working contrary to your notion of how the bioswale is going to function and look and where it should start and where it should stop and where the snow would be. And everybody who's ever done a parking lot has had to deal with snow. It's not a special hardship for you. It's a thing to solve. It's not a thing to say that you can't do any planting because we have snow. It's just a thing that you need to solve.
okay.
And, I can't personally give any relief for that. So I do have an issue with the screen. I don't know what you can do about the evergreen, though you did say you've kept some spruce in reserve. But, in terms of screening, we've got all deciduous and, there's really not screening going on. It just wasn't part of the concept, and that is a requirement. And I would also like to say, we don't have any lighting, so, we can't finish a site plan without lighting either. So we still do have some work to do here.
Well, we do have lighting on the landscape drawing, which was all engineered. Is there a printed plan? Yeah,
I missed it.
there's
Where is it?
Yeah, I probably should have asked you for the specs on the actual light fixture, though. I don't think you gave us those, did you?
Yeah, there was a lighting engineered sheet.
Oh, there's photometrics on the last page.
Yeah, and they're represented in the landscape plan because none are wall mounted, they're all pole mounted in the foreground of the building. And I believe that in the specs, the poles are 25 feet. 25 feet. It's in the cut sheet, so I remember I looked, it might have been 25 or 23, and I figured there'd be a low stanchion, just to know how I could landscape with trees without blocking it, just working.
It said photometrics on the last page, I didn't see the photometrics.
I think perhaps we didn't get the page with photometrics. I see it listed on the table of contents here, lighting and photometrics, but I don't actually see it. Here's, we do have sheet X1 that seems to show the pole locations. The X1, last of the engineering, shows pole
Yeah,
locations.
the locations can be seen on LS4 and LS5 the easiest, because that's an enlarged scale.
Okay.
But they appear in every landscape sheet except the existing.
I think I just assumed it was drainage. We're looking
Well,
at the
so-
circles that are crosshatched?
No, we're looking at the rectangles that are between the parking lot and the building, right? For lighting, yeah. So, these, on LS4. Yeah, right.
There.
So those, yeah.
Okay, so they've been located in rhythm with the building is the answer.
Yes, yeah, but they did the photometric study to show the light patterns, and then we worked our trees to not interfere. For the most part, they are all in the front foundation areas of the building, with one at the north parking island with 2 parking spaces, and then one all the way on the north side of the curb along carriageway.
Oh, I see it. So it's almost in line,
Yeah,
the one in the northwest corner.
yeah. Yeah, then there's one on the north side of the parking lot where we're nearer to carriageway. So there's 8 altogether.
That's pretty much what I've got, Bob, but I think the addition of the peninsula or the island or the whatever that, you know, would allow some more screening, allow some more variety, allow something to happen at that upper plane of the parking, not down in the bioswale, is really what the intent of parking screening is all about. And right now, we don't have any parking screening, so it's a long way to get to discuss how much is opaque and how much is open. I don't really think we have parking screening at the moment, though you're very persuasive, and I love the bioswale.
Julie?
I think Carol's brought some really good points regarding the screening and the peninsulas and making sure we're meeting the requirements of the code. And I also am not a landscape architect, so I don't have a lot to say about plants in particular. And I thought it was sounded like a very thoughtful design with lots of considerations, and I don't have any other comments.
Can I have a comment?
Sure.
I accept that and move forward, but are you aware that there are 90 shrubs along with the row of trees?
Yes, but those little bits all in a line
Okay,
really aren't
it's
doing
fine.
anything for
Okay,
me.
it wasn't anymore. I'll accept it. I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that it wasn't
Yeah,
all
I see.
just the trees.
Yeah, they're really not anything resembling screening. They're, what, less than 50% of
Yes.
that edge? So you ask for some guidance, less than 50% is really not enough for me. And the way that they are so regular in their disposition, you know, they're like street lamp poles going by, you don't even see them. They have zero effect. They never have the effect of being opaque. They never have the effect of being transparent. So they're not being maximized. And you got a tough geometry to work with. Of course, they're gonna run in a line like that. You know, we're sort of running contrary to the concept of what you're trying to accomplish in the bioswale and against the building, but I really need to see something happen there. Describing it as Jody did as formal and linear, I thought was kind of a kind way to describe it.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna go back in history a little bit. Before I ask that, though, do you know what the total number of spaces that are actually required by code for this building? And are we exceeding that? Because this is surrounding the building almost totally like it was a shopping center. So I'm just wondering why we are adding 90-some spaces to begin with.
Currently, we have about 350 car spots now. And our largest tenant, Fresenius, is expanding into the building, and they're predicting that they'll have another at least 100 employees within the next 4 or 5 years. That's why we're looking to accommodate them.
Do they physically have the space within the building to expand like that?
They do. I believe they're allowed 100 square foot per employee, and I'm not positive their square footage, but they're at 60,000 now. Part of it, they're in the process of building out, applying for permits shortly.
Okay,
I
so,
think they've got 170 employees in the building now. They come between 6 a.m. till 6 at night, so different times of the day, they're there.
okay. Well, what's particularly disturbing to me, and again, I say I'm going back in history, so this is maybe not relevant to what your issue is, but I'm gonna get there. Is when this whole industrial park was developed, there was a 100-foot setback, period. Nothing was allowed in the front yard, and Rosso's that was before that happened, that was an earlier building. But the rest of everything, with the exception of Pasquasi's, was back 100 feet. With the development of Pasquasi's, we sort of did a compromise with them on having some of their display yard behind almost an invisible, or a very visible barrier to screen it all off. And that was set at 50 feet. This committee began the first Waukegan Road study. And that study eventually recommended that the setback be removed for buildings from 100 feet to 50 feet. And that the remaining 50 feet was not to be used for parking. It was to remain as green space. Am I correct in that? And then subsequent to that, the zoning board changed that, apparently. And I'm not quite sure when, and I'm not quite sure why, but they did. And I think this is going to have dramatic ramifications down the road, all the way to the Lake Forest line. It's going to open this all up to, parking lots like this that are going to be impossible to screen. So we just need to know that going in. And I'm pretty disturbed that, as far as I know, this board was never given the notice that the zoning board made that change. At least I wasn't, and haven't been the chairman of this board for 40 years. I would think I would know that, but I didn't. So that's neither here nor there. I think that what you've tried to do is probably, I will take one issue with something you said, is that this is the back of the building. This is the best-looking building all the way along there. And I'm just making that as a comment. It's always had a great setting, and I think this is not going to help it. I think what you're doing with your landscaping is about as good as you can go, given the fact that you have to have the swale now to hold your water. But I'm wondering if there's a magic number to the number of parking spaces you're added, because another thing that disturbs me is the corner, the northwest corner. If you simply rounded that off and eliminated probably 8 to 10 spaces, and would open up that corner lawn quite a bit, almost not quite what it is now, but quite a bit. That would help. I don't know about the screening issues that Carol's bringing up. I see the dilemma with, you can't really, you've got the swale, and what are you gonna do in there, really, other than what you've done? I'm just pointing this out to realize that, make everybody realize that things are gonna change along Waukegan Road. So that's really my main comment. I don't know how we can resolve the screening issue, and I frankly don't know that it matters. It's hundreds of feet long. Tree trunks don't do much. They're poles, they're just like telephone poles as you're driving by with stuff on top. I'm a little concerned about this placement of the lights, that by the nature of the way they're having to shine out towards Waukegan Road. With whatever the cutoff is, you can still potentially see glare. So that's something that I think needs to be looked at. Other than that, that's all I've got to say. Which doesn't help solve the problem.
Well, I'm with you on it, impossible to screen, but I would say it does matter, where you said it doesn't matter because it's all going to be so relentlessly parking along the corridor. Well, what matters is what we can do about the landscaping at a moment like this.
Yeah.
This team and only this team can address that problem, so it behooves us to do it. And, y'all are first to come down the pike really on this. With Pasquazi's, we did convince ourselves that, a green sales yard for a florist would not be such a horrific interruption to the green belt that we had, and, we burst the bubble with that. So, as Bob has said, the question is, how far does it go? Have we gone down with the ship already or not? And, this is an opportunity to show the way to do this and to tell everybody who comes after you that they have to do as good a job as you did. And Pasquazi's, of course, did a tremendous amount of landscaping, but,
I'm the landscape architect
yeah.
for Pasquazi. I did that project.
Oh, well,
Thank
you
you.
did a great job.
Thank you. Yeah. And I was, 18 months in negotiation for the zoning change, but I think it looks wonderful. So I see that, I could do that again.
Well, you have a clear palette for your bioswale, you have a clear palette against the building. I think you need a third palette at this parking lot, and I think Bob has the only practical approach to say, what is the magic number on the parking? Can you give up 2 here and 2 here and 2 here and 2 here? What is the minimum dimension for you to create a third palette? And, his suggestion is, get rid of 8 on the corner if you can, because you'd like to see the corner work, and you put a lot of effort into it, but, you know, Bob's saying, you know.
The 8 at the corner, we've achieved very dense screening. We have, because we're out of the bioswale there. The, you know, one option is bald cypress down slope, like leaving the shrub kind of where it is, but a lot of bald cypress scattering to upslope at a lower level, which would put the foliage, you're not gonna see the nose of the cars. So that, you know, that's, my thought is, I know how hard it is to like rearrange, you scrunch the hill slope over, all the numbers get crunched. There's a lot of storage under the parking lot now to, so there's vault storage underneath there. And there's rules on, you know, your upslope coming down from Waukegan Road, how close you can disturb to their property. So I can improve the density if I'm planting down more, I don't wanna say at the bottom, but at the crease. But I have to pick plants that like that, and then they have to get tall enough to put their foliage. And I think it's actually, it's easier for me to use trees than to try to do it with the shrubs. I might have to do a combination so it doesn't get monotonous. But I don't really know, you know, I'm not the one to ask about the quantity of parking spaces. In our review, it seemed that, in our staff reviews, that we had a workable number, but I don't know if there's anything that we can look to that would tell us.
What I'm talking about without knowing that answer, you know, obviously myself, is that if you take the corner, the northeast corner, and go 4 or 5 cars this way and 4 or 5 cars that way, and create that arc, and that just becomes a drive going from the east-west parking lot to the north-south parking lot. So that land where that property where the parking lot, those spaces are, is like this, and it becomes lawn again.
Thanks.
And that just softens that one corner. It doesn't really resolve some of the issues we're talking about, but it keeps it from that corner being in your face. A little bit.
It does, and we need more of that.
Well, I mean, you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Is there any kind of time sharing that goes on with the parking spaces here? Is everybody 9 to 5 in this building? You know, the movement is to loosen up parking requirements rather than have endless asphalt that isn't used. This is, you know, a problem that the shopping centers have, where we would require them to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parking spaces as if it's always Black Friday. And I don't know your situation.
Yeah, currently we have 6 tenants in the building. Some are doctor's offices, are closed on Wednesdays, but there are times in the middle of the day where the lot is quite full. So it's hard to tell a tenant that, you know, don't be there at lunchtime. The largest employer there, Fresenius, has, like I said, 170 employees, and in the middle of the day, they're overlapping. So at that time, the lot is full.
Well, we've heard 100 plus 170
No,
in terms
right,
of
currently
employees.
currently 170 now.
Right,
They're looking to go on at least another 100,
right. So that's 100 plus 170.
yes.
And it was, the total was higher than that. And, you know, it's not within our purview to change the number of parking spaces required. We just would
Just
be,
trying to make a suggestion as to how it might
No,
make that corner a little more palatable to.
yeah.
all right,
Well-
when I
Right on the number of parking spaces, when the building was sold and it was remodeled,
We added quite a few.
there were parking spaces added around the other 3
Oh,
sides.
this whole row up here, this is
Yeah.
all redone up here.
Yeah.
And it was satisfactory without all this parking in the front. So I
That-
don't think any of this is a
That
requirement.
client was not
Correct.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think all these parking spaces that are being added are not required.
that's right. Yeah, I think we're already above the minimum in code, but they want more to accommodate the number
Yeah,
of people
right.
in the building.
So it's not a code
Right.
issue.
Right.
Yeah, well,
correct.
that was my original
Right.
question, you know, it seemed to me like we've exceeded what's required, but if that particular business has got so many, it's so, dense, you know, we can't have people parking elsewhere, I don't think. But I don't know if it's just what'll fit, or if you could lose 8 and it'd still be okay. That's my question.
Right, so you're proposing 8 at the corner, I'm proposing losing more along the Waukegan Road corridor where we have an obligation to do screening. And even, I'm even only talking about clusters of screening, you know, a third pallet, a third story that you would create. I'm not creating it, it's, you know, it's up to you. My job here is to say that it's not satisfying the requirements, not to create the solution.
Yeah, what is that document? Because before I started, I called to get requirements, and I was given, there's no written guideline, it has to be proportionate, but, because I asked for quantity of trees per parking stall, percentage of opaque screening or continuous shrub screening, you know, because sometimes it might be 65%, it's rarely 100%, you know, but if it's a written document, I need that as a guideline.
It's a boilerplate zoning, not just in Lake Bluff, but in many communities.
It's, in our zoning ordinance, it says parking lots shall be screened by landscaping, is basically what it says. But it doesn't give you specifics on
Okay.
what plants or how many or that type of thing.
Okay.
Are we at a stalemate here? I'm not sure where we're going. I think it's south.
No, but I think we need to have a firm hand on what the requirements are, particularly in light of your statement that, you know, it's, you know, you're seeing the whole corridor going into the poopster.
I am.
Want to work the word bogus into this somehow? Sorry,
I mean,
just teasing.
Yeah.
Levity, but, you know, it's our obligation to do this, and it's your obligation to do this, so.
This was very similar to when the permissions were granted to Pasquazy. I mean, it really was. I said, okay, that was new territory, and it worked out.
And this is, I mean, when we went to the 50 feet after that Pasquazy thing, that sort of said, well, why can't we make that work? You know, you did it at Pasquazy, so we can make that work. But there's no driveway out there, there's no parking out there. And the 50 feet was to give, at that point in time, this was gonna be the ability for some other kind of businesses, whether it be retail or something. We said, well, let them expand into that area with building. And we even did some sketches on how it could be and established different heights where it would step up from Waukegan Road. Well, that all got, I think, just abandoned by the zoning board. And so here we are.
The current corridor study shows a parking lot on
Yeah,
that side of the building.
That's
you know,
not
it-
what we did.
Yeah, and we objected to it when we saw it, I think.
I don't think I ever saw it, other than,
We did see a sketch that showed a lot of development.
that was when I was not here. That was that office building down there, right?
Well,
Anyway, that's
No.
not, we don't need to keep
No,
hashing
yeah, it's not
that
here
over.
now.
it was a study.
But, can we lose 8 spaces? That's just a little bit of something.
I'd lose a lot more than 8. If that's what we need, is some land on the upper table to even begin to approach some screening or some modulation of that hard edge, which was never our intent. And the zoning code says you're gonna screen your parking lot, let alone on Waukegan Road, you're gonna screen your parking lot anywhere. Now, I do think we can have some latitude, but
I think the zoning did not take into account a 300 or 400 or 500-foot long parking lot being screened. How you gonna do it?
Right, because you don't want to make one solid wall for
Right.
that length.
And you
Right.
plant, bushes that are gonna go up to hide the bumpers of the car, and all of a sudden, now you've got a security issue on the other side, so.
Mhm.
What do you think, Neil? Any ideas?
Yeah, I'd like to see the 8 spaces disappear, and I'd like to see some more islands along there. I had trouble thinking of how you're gonna screen it, because once you go down the hill, you're gonna have to plant 10-foot tall things to screen it. And it wouldn't work.
No, but I can do more. I'm not saying it wouldn't work. I just think that it might be bald cypress down more at the crease of the slope, which, we would never plant those like a hedge though. We'd stagger them a little bit and just leave a more natural rhythm. Double up the density of the shrubs, but I would really try hard to not create a wall separating the top of the hill from the bottom of the hill.
So you've got, the most space you have is, if I'm looking at, it between the, I guess that's the property line. You've got roughly 15 feet before your hill starts going down. Am I about right there?
I'm gonna say yes. Cliff, what was the code from the highway department?
Yeah, exactly.
15 feet.
Is that untouchable? Before you start sloping down, right, is there anything that can happen on that side?
Steep, by a stretch, but that's where the.
Yes, we can add some scattered trees in the open pockets around the existing hackberry and oak and maples. A shrub master too. I just had 2 groups of shrubs on that side, the heptacodium, 7 sunflower shrub, but we could do more of that, but I was trying to do the bioswale. I don't wanna screen it heavily on both sides where like nobody knows it's there. Not that that's gonna happen, but it's kind of a one theme from where the grass, the mowed lawn ends up to the back of the curb was kind of treated as one composition instead of layer, bottom, upslope, grass edge at the top, because the high water line is only 33 feet across at the widest. So it's, I wasn't trying to like make multiple rows of wall. But yes, there's improvement. I didn't hear your question.
I was just asking, this is, at some point, in some of the major storms we seem to have every other week now, will this hold water for a period of time?
He's got it all figured out.
Yeah, Cliff Tilberman, project engineer and principal at Norman J. Torm Associates. So there's a 6-inch outlet pipe for that property, and she functions very well for mid-size, small-size storm events. Water does not stay around too long. It is retained, but it does have given a nice 6-inch pipe, she draws down within 24 hours, 48 max. So that's, myself and John worked through that, trying to understand his plantings and how long water's residing in the basin or under the vault, et cetera, or how high does it get. Larger storm events, for sure, it's just a function of how well the water, the outlet pipe is drained. Remember, there's a ditch that comes across from Waukegan from west to east. So, that pipe is occupied by the flow coming from on the opposite side, the west side of Waukegan, runs underneath. We're discharging to that same pipe that picks up that flow. So it's a little bit of function of how that behaves, the drainage in that pipe, and that's about it. It's on the big events, on the 100-year events, certainly it's going to be filled up. 10 to 20, again, a 100-year event, 1% chance in any given year. 50-year storm, a 2% chance in any given year, et cetera, et cetera. 10-year would be a 10% chance. So 10 years, she's going up, Face it, guys, it's sort of like this, right? So the water's gonna fill up pretty quickly in that triangular space.
Yeah.
But remember, there's a big vault. We have an underground vault that takes, honestly, most of the time, there'll be very little water in very frequent storm events, 1 inch, inch and a half, 2. Really, where she's all going is the vault and out the 6-inch pipe. So in many cases, the rain that's coming down from the lot, from the surrounding area, is gonna feed that bioswale and be detained in the bioswale, infiltrated into the bioswale plants. If it gets a large enough storm, we've actually given the ability for the water to only go so high, and then she can actually feed a little more into the vault. So, but that's how it's behaving. First the vault, then a little bit of the basin fills up, starts filling. The vault's got quite a bit of volume, and it's got a good outlet pipe for many, many storm events. Not to say the 100 years not going to fill up, the 50-year even, and you'll go by there, but it won't last for that long. That's the difference. Okay, we're not in a flood-prone area in that particular property, so it's not as if we're down by the river where it's just a function of that river. That's not the case on this property. Okay.
I think the bioswale is great. It'd be nice to see that. It's too bad there's cars behind it. I'm gonna go back to my 8 cars or whatever it takes. Can that be done? You wanna see what I'm talking about, or do you know what I'm talking about?
To radius the corner to where,
Right,
as you're turning, you're
You're
in a
turning, so it
drive
just
lane,
becomes
not
a
a parking
driving lane there as you're making the turn.
That northwest corner.
The northwest corner, yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe it doesn't do much, but to me, it gives you a bit more lawn to deal with. Takes the bumpers out of your face for a while.
I'd kind of like to see, it looks like you have 30 spaces in a row, and then a little island that comes out, and then 30 more along that side. Maybe at least put in.
Without me counting it, yes.
Yeah. Maybe put in one in between there. So like 2 more islands.
Okay.
Just to split that up.
Yeah, I'd like to see more than a single tree in it, so. Yeah, again, looking for screening instead of, just
Trees or
a
sticks?
trunk.
Yeah.
I agree with Tim. It wouldn't provide screening, and it could be more than just a telephone pole or a tree. There can be some landscaping in the island in addition to the
Yeah.
one tree.
Yeah,
But it's not
Some of the
screening.
danger of doing some of that, if I envision it, is that it gets very spotty. Ba-dum, 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 with, I don't care what the rhythm is, there's no flow to it.
Yeah, but what Member Callahan is proposing is better than what we have, so
I
it's
don't know.
a good direction.
Yeah.
It is the straight line in
Yeah.
the parking lot.
Yeah.
I mean,
And maybe
That's what
that's
parking
what
lots do.
has to change, right now, everything is based on that straight line. It's wonderful that the building Sawtooth, has so much sculptural effect to it. At least we're not looking at a single blank wall of drive-it along there with,
yeah.
the lines of parking but, maybe the swale itself has to change in geometry. Maybe the sculptural form of that single slope has to change. Which messes up everything to do that. So if you don't do it up on the plateau by taking away parking spaces, and then you start to have to modify the swale itself, then we've really taken a bigger step even than the modest proposal from Member Callahan. So I'm saying, keep going. Well, take 8 parking spaces too. Bob can have 8, I can have 8. How many do you want, Tim?
I don't know that that's totally the answer.
Yeah,
It's,
Bob, I see that pen wiggling in a curve. I saw it. I can't even see what you're drawing, but I know.
if you did I'm not pretending to be a landscape architect, but if you did the west side of the swale, kind of towards the middle, and just sort of bowed it out in a very gentle curve that probably, maybe went out only 5 or 6 feet, and maybe come back in the other side to make it a little more natural looking, but in that bow, now you've got 20-some feet to plant a swath of things that maybe is 30 or 40 feet long.
You mean undulate the west border of the bioswale seating?
Just in a.
Visually, in plan view, we can undulate it, but in engineering view, it's got
I get you,
a
yeah.
constant
In
bank,
plan, it would
so
just
some of
do
that is,
just a little bit of that, just, and that may give you a little bit of room to put some plant material that's not just, tree trunks.
Okay, now we have 2 good ideas.
But I don't think we can get rid of all of it. I mean, I'm sorry, I wish we could, and that's what our code says we should do, but short of building a 6-foot-high brick wall from one end to the other, I don't know how you do it.
I think the idea of putting bald cypress down a little bit downslope is a good idea too, because and you can let the branching be as low as you want. So you have screenage from the ground.
And how big is a bald cypress with the
They'll get
height?
big.
they get large,
They grow pretty
You drive
fast.
within a mile, you'll see some 40-footers, they've been there a while, but.
Well,
it's-
something to ponder, because we've seen them all over the place for the last 2 months, is there's lines that go along there, if I remember right. Telephone lines, power lines, whatever. Aren't they running right along there? And wherever there's a tree that is within arm's length of a wire, these guys come and just butcher it. So
Yeah, but bald cypress, it's a good tree. It's very tolerant of wet conditions. May not always be a perfect lawn tree because in Louisiana, they get the knees that kind of crawl out of the riverbank. And in Illinois, they kind of get, call them knees, stumps in the lawn. In a bioswale area, it's just a pretty tree, it's native. It doesn't matter if, but when I say knees, the tree grows here and then over there in the lawn, you'll get towers of root mass coming out of the ground. So we plant them, we like them, perfect for a wet area. In a bioswale, you've eliminated all the negatives of it sending shallow roots up into the lawn.
If I
You have to
remember,
limit the quantity to where it doesn't become the bald cypress landscape. So I think they look very natural in a colony. It's used often in a golf course for flanking a fairway or creating a backdrop. They're used in parkway trees frequently now too, but it's fairly recent.
if I remember correctly, I think we do not have overhead power lines along this frontage, right?
No.
That's right.
I don't think so.
Okay, I think it's only farther south on Waukegan.
There is one utility pole
That we have
right by
there.
Waukegan. We do have two.
Yeah,
We have
there's
two
a light
poles shown
pole.
on the drawing, but they're within a few feet of the Waukegan curb.
Okay,
And, yeah, I think there's one at the south property line right away to Waukegan.
okay,
But I can't picture overhead wires.
yeah.
Well, we're up to 3 good ideas now. So bald cypress is a deciduous conifer? I didn't know there was such a thing.
Yeah.
What does it look like?
Well,
Here,
It
Is it
looks
an
like an evergreen, but it's.
Looks like an
not.
evergreen, and its needles turn like a rust color in the
Okay.
fall.
Well, that's-
They drop.
Yeah, I think you're right. You just have a clump of them someplace and call it a day.
They get big. They're happy they get really big.
Yeah.
But it's very pretty foliage. It's appropriate with the character of the bioswale, because it's a natural character.
Are we getting anywhere? Can you get a little bit on board with what we're talking about?
I'm not being argumentative. It's like, we want to do the parking lot project, so I can increase screening. You know, the term parking lot must be screened. My interpretation would mean that I can still see there's cars there. If the interpretation is you can't see the cars, that's gonna be tough. So, you know, finding a middle ground, I'll do my best. Undulating the west side to have some pockets of shrubs are fine. Adding 6-8 trees on the far side where the existing tree groves have voids in them would work. I have to keep it all within the, we'll call it that 10 to 15 foot area
Right.
that's not the right of way. You know, the parking lot count isn't my call. I would think that, you know, we're being asked to reduce them. I'm not the one to speak to know what I can change. Or it's not only the parking spots, some of just the manipulation of the parking lot and the turns has to do with the fire trucks, et cetera. So I thought, yes, we tried to have the parking farther from carriageway, couldn't do it with the fire trucks. That's why it ends up continuing with the same alignment of all the existing parking on that side. So, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. No, for us, we're not looking as a company to add parking and spend a small fortune to do that. The building needs it. That's why we're after the 90 spots that we could get. You know, could we live with 80-something? If that's all, you know, if that's all that's there, that's all that's there. But, you know, that we desperately need as much as we can get.
Well, I think the three good ideas so far are the bald cypress, the undulation of the swale, which, you know, might be in both plan and section, you know, a three-dimensional approach, creating new plateaus of planting, and I still am on the trail of eliminating some parking to add some islands. Though that's not precisely the right word for a peninsula, but it does, more than the other two solutions, help to modulate the parking line. So it's probably the most effective, but I like all three, and if we had 4 and 5 and 6 good ideas, that would be great too. I'm sure you'll think of 4, 5, and 6 once you apply yourselves to it. But in the absence of knowing how many parking spaces are needed, we are kind of whistling in the wind, and if a parking lot can't be screened, it doesn't automatically mean you get the parking lot without screening. So, you know, that also is not within anybody's control here. So anything that can ameliorate what the problems this is causing is a step in the right direction. In the same way that we talked ourselves into the fact that we thought Pasquazi's would look great because it would be a seasonal sales yard, you know, there were some things that didn't work out so perfectly well, but the landscaping was nice. Thank you.
What didn't work out?
I was vehemently opposed to having the service yard in that green belt and said so several times,
At the
but
south end of it, where
Yeah.
the pallet stacks and all that are,
Yeah, it's pretty
And
well buffered now, but that was,
Yeah,
you know, we transplanted all the big random crabs. We moved most of those
Yeah.
around the south
yeah,
end.
it's still not totally screened. To me, a better solution would be not having the service yard in the green belt.
Yeah.
But you know what? Ed said, not gonna do it, not gonna do it, not gonna do it.
Yeah.
So building owners sometimes do that. Just refuse, but I think there are 3 good ideas here. I think if we spent longer, we could have some more. I think if you spent longer, you could have some more.
well, I don't think it's our job to redesign this thing, and I don't want to insult our petitioner here to say that we could. I think we're just throwing out ideas. I personally don't think that you gain much by putting an island in the row of cars in this kind of a situation. I'd rather do something on the other side. But that's me, because I'm not sure what that would be. To me, most of those island plantings don't turn out to be very successful.
For just traffic safety and a car maneuvering around one, basically I need vegetation that's knee-high to thigh-high, and then a gap, and then the canopy of the tree.
Yeah.
If I put anything taller in there, I'm creating a hazard. So that's kind of why I went with pick trees, they'll tolerate the wetness. You know, the Nyssa sylvatica, they can go farther down the hill. They could. So I could slide those down. There's not an unlimited, you know, I don't want to start planting silver maples.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I could,
No,
willow trees.
please don't.
You know, willow trees. But what I'm saying is that pick trees that are creating that, what you're thinking of is like a shrub line buffer. If I do that using the canopy part of trees, I don't know, you know, the only evergreen I could consider probably would be eastern white, or not white cedar, eastern red cedar, juniper. But it's just, you know, really too many wet days and, you know, they don't recover. So I gotta think about that, but it's not really conducive to putting an evergreen in
Right.
a wet area. You know,
Right,
the
but-
far side, you know, maybe a couple where I said I was saving the spruce, but once the dominant character of the bioswale came together, the spruce were kind of coming out of left field, but they accomplished that. It's an evergreen, it's a buffer, and I've got high ground over there. So, you know, I have to maneuver it.
Yeah, a single tree trunk doesn't do much for me. It has to be a complement of plantings, and it has to have a sculptural character to it. And yes, it can only go so high. I've actually measured where my eyeball is on my short car. It's 42 inches. It's really low. I don't have a crossover or an SUV. You know, 42 inches would be the limit of what I can see in my car, and that's huge. But, you know, if our guideline, if our boilerplate standard, if the industry standard is to have an island for every 15 parking spaces, it means exactly what Member Callahan said, that, you know, those 3 spaces in a row will be interrupted. And we're not even counting the ones on the other side. We're just counting on the Waukegan Road side when we say 1 every 15 parking spaces. So that would seem to me to be a minimum complement, to have something wider than a single tree trunk in 3 locations where you have, what, one, I forgot, is it an elm? Triumph elm.
Yep.
Well, they're all within perennial beds, but if it's in and amongst where the cars are maneuvering, I have to keep sight lines.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't put tall things, I need a trunk tree. I can't block view for cars that are backing out, and that's why, you know, usually in an island, it's gonna be a trunk tree with plants that are appropriate for safety site triangle height, which is usually 2 feet or 30 inches. So,
So all of these trees that are shown on your landscape drawing in the right-of-way are actually there. I don't, for some
Yeah.
reason, I buy there and I don't.
you know what, right now, there's a lot of remnant beds with dead aronia, half honeysuckle. It's just kind of this dismal thing. You look past it to the face of the building. But, you know, part of the project is, besides the removal, is just pruning and cleaning up, assuming that we'd have permission to clean those up. But they're nice trees in there. It's just been neglected, and when I say a dead with bad shrub, these are like right-of-way beds, but it looks like those plants have been dead for 6 years. Or there's no grass in it, but half the bed is completely empty. So it's kind of shown on our LS1, because I kind of dotted in the beds that to just get rid of those. But there are some nice trees there. It looks like some might have been volunteers or random years ago, because there's no real organization or rhythm, it's kind of haphazard. You know, I don't think anybody would go out today and plant hackberries, you know, 9 feet apart, but they're big trees now, and it looks nice.
Yeah, the parkway randomness has its appeal. But, you know, instead of thinking of this as a flat palette, you know, with stuff rising up at the parking level, I can't think of the words for it. In Michigan, they're very proud of having, you know, depressed islands where the water on the asphalt and the fuel oil and all that crap runs into plant species
We have
depressed.
We have some of that.
And, you
There
know,
are-
the water is
Yeah,
treated.
I see those, you've got
Yeah,
them.
there is overflow
Filter.
areas where the central elm tree is actually a wash area.
Yeah.
I mean, there's cobbles in there, but that's usually a requirement for
But
a diffusion ban. So,
But
you know, some of the planting space is taken up by the rocks. But it
So
ends-
to undulate and modulate this edge, though, it doesn't all have to be up on the plateau and be, you know, a box of shrubbery up here. You can take out 2 parking spaces, you can depress the land, you can make part of your planting come out into the swale without changing your numbers on the water, but you are significantly changing that linear edge. You know, it's like a pencil straight curb line now for, I don't know how many feet, 300 feet, did we say?
Yeah, it's,
Anything that interrupts that is an improvement. So no one has said, you know, build a brick wall, no one has said, put, you know, a line of U's along the entire line, no one has even come near saying anything like that. But anything that modulates that single line is helpful. It helps to visually screen, visually interrupt that relentless row of cars.
in some ways, I think I addressed that, where if you look at where the central elm tree is, that density of shrub spills down a little bit deeper into the basin. You go south of that, you can't really manipulate it much because there's underground vault storage. And if you go to the way south, the most southerly elm tree is nudged extra far off the curb because the vault storage travels out from underneath the parking lot into the soil zone. So we've got, you know, we've calculated out exactly what the soil depth is over the vaults, but at a certain point, it's like a non-plantable spot. You know, there's a structure buried in the ground.
Well, Bob will be glad you could concentrate more in the corner then.
I would rather put the effort by not eliminating any more parking, live with the straight line and see what we can do with the rest of it.
You know, I was just going kind of off of that, an island every 15 spaces thing, but then I look over here and it's like, I don't
Yeah.
know how many spaces, and then
Yeah.
on the other
We didn't
side,
do that.
it's
I think part of it also is that on the other side, there's an inordinate number of jogs. There's a lot of movement in the parking lot on that side. And I think that long sweep is like, well, there's a cleanliness to that. And it makes the other side reflect the building very nicely. So, you know, I can add screening, and maybe I could hit the benchmark without the 2 additional peninsulas. We're gonna have to look at the corner 8-spot discussion. But there's not like 3 suggestions, like 6 or 8 that, you know, in some form or another can meld together in an updated plan.
What do you plan to do with the sculpture?
We either will donate it or, you know, have it removed.
There's no place around the front side. It's big. I always
It's
thought
big
A lot of
and-
people think it's awful. I think it's pretty neat.
You know, it's a subjective thing. There are tenants that want us to remove it. Not too many say they really like it, but I'm sure some people do. But we've had several requests to remove it. So we would look to donate it, or then we'd have to dispose of it.
Okay, where are we? We coming to some sort of closure that you're gonna try and do some of these, see what you can come up with, and then we'll
It's,
take another
it's
look.
all engineering related, so it's a site plan, update landscape, look at.
Yeah, I don't see that we're doing anything that would really change the engineering, other than, well, no, it shouldn't anyway. I don't know.
Probably not on the stormwater, maybe some of the curb alignment and,
If you do just
Fire
a
truck
slight
and-
bend in this way, then you can take it up by going back out the other way. You know, just, I'm talking
you know.
just enough to take the curse off of the, sliced berm look, which is not what you were talking about anyway, but.
Mhm.
And thank you for all the thought you put into the bioswale. It sounds like it's gonna be magnificent when it's mature.
Okay, thank you.
Minus the cattails, I like that.
Well, that's why I said I was very happy it wasn't a wet bottom detention basin, because they're, I mean, not to fault.
There are cattails growing right now.
But,
I think there's,
hard to see my small design,
Oh, yeah.
anywhere you drive is cattails.
Yeah.
All these
Yeah.
native plants are gone.
yeah, you're just creating a habitat for things you might not want,
Then
where,
there's mosquitoes
and, but, on that, I don't wanna say it fell in place, but, at a certain point, the decision was increase the underground storage to get it to the point where, because at one point, we had like 15 inches of slow draining water. What is it, 81, everything 80, under 81? Yeah, but it was just like, well, by slow draining, it doesn't mean it's stagnant, it just meant that you'll notice it left at a slower rate than the first part of the rainstorm. So when Cliff called and said that the, kind of that slow draining, it's draining fast. Certain point, it'll slow down. But it's below the bottom drain grates in the basin. That's just a little bit more
So
manageable.
this
way to
just
design it.
permeating down, there's no standpipes or anything in there like,
There's no bottom drain tiles, there are inlets, and it's only a 1% slope. So when it gets wet, it's gonna still take a long time to migrate down towards the inlets and percolate in. But it's harder if after a normal rainstorm, there was 6-8 inches of water for 2 or 3 days. That's harder to select plantings for and manage than if 12 or 18 hours after the rainstorm, there's nothing in there. Are we close to that? Somewhere in between there? Depends on the size of the rainstorm.
Keep in mind, for a lot of frequent rains, we're required to meet the best management practices in the ordinance of Lake County.
right?
We actually are gonna hold back for 2-year storm events, but the water's actually stored in the vault. So you're gonna have a small depth of water, foot and a half, I can't remember the exact number. But really, there's only 1.5 inches, or is it 2.5? I think maybe it's a 2.5 inch restrictor. It's actually holding the low flow, the 2-inch rains, inch and a half. So, and the whole idea there is to try to get some infiltration going. In the gravel, in the clay below, and it's clay, nothing around here, guys, does any great infiltration, but it does a little bit at a time. And so there's some of that going on. The gravel underlying the vault is surface area. So basically it's bacterial, it's a filtration is almost, it's a filtrate, natural biofilter develops on those stones because they're always damp, they're always, it's a way to biofilter, I'll call it, that low flow of water through the stone. And eventually it does drain, it has a small restrictor, but a bigger storm is actually gonna overflow a weir that's only about, 2 foot up, 1.5 foot, 2 foot in the vault. Vault's 4 foot deep, I wanna say, or 5 foot, I'm sorry, vault's 5 foot deep. There's the vault. It'll actually start overflowing to the real 6-inch pipe when there's a major storm. And then sure enough, she'll get into the basin, start building in that basin, actually backflow into the basin and when it needs to, So we have ample storage for that, so.
Well, Michael, were you gonna ask the gentleman to come back?
Well, yeah, if we've given you clear enough direction then to know what to come back, we can resubmit for next month and proceed.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Which is the name, George.
I thought that was discussed here. I thought you guys were okay with that. I thought we talked about it here. Now you've got me doubting my memory. Now you've got me doubting my memory. Yeah. But I thought that was discussed.
I would have raised all objections to it.
Yeah.
But when we presented are we done?
Yeah, we should adjourn the meeting, right?
Okay. Anybody want to move?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, second.
Second it.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, we're done.
Meeting adjourned, yeah.
No, when we